Hi, I'm Jay, and I've got an agenda. All right, well, for those of you who's seen this before, welcome back, and I want to say hello to any new viewers that join. Please remember to click and subscribe. Anyway, I want to get started on the agenda today. The first thing on my agenda has to do with driving. Now, I'm not a driving teacher, but I do a lot of driving professionally, and I want to talk on this video first thing about merging. Specifically, two kinds of merges. The first one, the merge that we do when we're entering a highway or entering an interstate. And the second merge that I want to talk a little bit about is the merge that occurs when a lane is closing on a highway, likely due to construction. Now, in the first merge, when you're merging onto the highway, the general rule is that the vehicle that's already in the traveling lane, that is the highway, has the right of way, and the merging vehicle must yield. That means yield the right of way. Now, there are some exceptions depending on the specific situation, but as a general rule, the cars that are already traveling at highway speed on the highway have the right of way, and those merging have to yield. The second merge that I want to speak of briefly is the merge that occurs when a lane is closing due to construction or perhaps a crash. Now, the proper, most efficient way, at least the best practice according to the Federal Highway Administration, is what's called a zipper merge. And you can imagine exactly what that is. That cars alternate in the merge. The one in the open lane gives way to a car that's merging in front of them, and a car behind them opens up space for another car, so on and so forth. So there are a few things about merging, specifically about merging onto the highway, that I want to review with you. First of all is use your signals. No matter the type of merge or the lane change, use your damn signal. Let the drivers behind you know, and those that are looking at you in their rearview mirror, what your intentions are. And when you merge onto the highway, go with the flow of traffic. Look for a 3 to 4 second space. Merge into the lane of travel and go the same speed that those in front of you and those are behind you are going. Do not merge and then slow down. Similarly, do not merge and then speed up, closing on the driver in front of you. Speeding up or cutting over 2 or 3 lanes. Find a nice 3 to 4 second cushion. Look around you, adjust your speed, and then make any lane change that you feel is necessary. Maintain a safe following distance. Just reference that, 3 to 4 seconds. All right, so be sure that when you're merging onto the interstate, you follow these tips. When you're merging in construction traffic, use the zipper merge rule. And above all, don't be an ass. Now, the second thing on the agenda that I want to discuss is the concept or the idea of democracy, specifically American democracy, in whatever form you believe it exists. What form of government do we as working class people in the United States really have? Now, most of us would reflectively respond and say that we're a democracy. To be more precise, we might say that it's a representative democracy. That is, a form of democracy where citizens elect the government officials to represent them on their behalf or to govern on their behalf. And while we do hold elections here in the United States, is it really true that our popular and collective will is being expressed is really being represented and imposed by those who we've elected to represent us. Now, that might have been true at some point in U.S. history, but this so-called representative republic that exists now has degenerated to the point that we can't truthfully say that we have a democracy, much less a representative democracy. And so I want to offer the definitions of 4 forms of government for the sake of contrast and comparison to a democracy. I submit to you that we actually live under the degenerate rule of oligarchs, kakistocrats, and plutocrats. And all of these are interwoven within the present ruling class who now have control over us all. Now, I want to start first with a definition of democracy. Now, you may have heard this definition in a civics class. You may have read it in a textbook somewhere, maybe a dictionary. Maybe you have a pretty good grasp on what democracy, the meaning of democracy is. But it is a system of government in which state power is vested in the people or the general population of the state. Now, the United Nations defines a democracy, as I quote, that it provides an environment that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms, and in which the freely expressed will of the people is exercised. The next term that I want to review or share with you is what's called an oligarchy. Now, it comes from a combination of Greek words which means by rule by a few. It's a power structure in which power rests with a small number of people. These people may or may not be distinguished by one or several characteristics such as nobility or fame, wealth, education, by their position in the business world or the finance world, the banking world, corporate world. They might be religious figures, political figures, or even military figures or a group of military figures. Now, throughout history, power structures considered to be oligarchies have often been viewed as coercive, as relying on public obedience or oppression to exist or to have legitimacy. The next form of government is what's called a kakistocracy. And that is a government run by the worst, least qualified, or most scrupulous, reprobate, corrupt officials. It has the literal meaning of government run by the worst kinds of people. Now, some that come to my mind immediately are people like Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the Clintons. Many of the officials that are actually in charge aren't even elected. They're bureaucrats, and they're in positions of authority based not on their capabilities, based not on being elected, but they're there based on their connections within the ruling class. Now, the next term, the final one that I want to offer to you is the term plutocracy. It means power derived by wealth. And it's a society that is ruled or controlled by people of great wealth or income. So maybe now you can see how all of these terms start fitting together to define our ruling class. Now, throughout history, political theorists and philosophers have condemned plutocrats for ignoring their social responsibilities, namely because they're just antisocial, they're psychopaths, and they've used their power to serve their own purposes, thereby increasing poverty and nurturing class conflict and corrupting societies with their greed and their hedonism. Their impact on societies, their influence of their greed and hedonism on society. So what's obvious here is that we can no longer honestly claim that we live in a democracy of any sort. Democracy in the United States is a fraud. Democracy in the United States is a farce. As one revolutionary freedom fighter once said, the oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representatives of the oppressing class are to represent and repress them in Parliament, or in our case in the United States, in Congress. And that same revolutionary observed that America has become one of the most foremost countries in regard to the depth of the abyss which lies between a handful of arrogant millionaires who wallow in moral filth and luxury and the millions of working people who are constantly on the verge of pauperism. Now, these few who wallow in their moral filth, their degeneracy, and their power, and their luxury, are the very ones that we've just described here. So what is to be done? Well, I want you to remember the definitions that I've shared with you. And I want you to observe how this ruling political class works consistently and predictably in policy making in a way that serves and protects their own interests. It has nothing to do with your interests, with our interests. And if you can hold these definitions in mind as you see the American government and the system of governments continue to degenerate, then the real form of government will come into focus to you. Also, reject the legitimacy and the credibility of this ruling class dictatorship. They're not empowered to represent you. They have none of your interests in the center of their thoughts and in their actions. So reject their legitimacy, reject their credibility. Why continue to think that they are your rulers or that they represent their interests when they don't? Reject the claims of the ruling class controlled media and the sewer stream sources of information that they give to you. Reject it out of hand, understanding that whatever it is that they tell you is there to serve their interests, whether it's to distract you, whether it's to misinform you, whether it's to confuse you, or even to incite your anger against another group or persons within the working class. Challenge and resist the authority of this ruling class dictatorship. It is our resistance and not our ballots, not our voting, that will ultimately bring fundamental changes to this system. Begin to rouse yourselves politically and create political groups which undertake the struggle to create a new socioeconomic political system based on socialist principles, mainly those codified by Marx and by Engels. Those guys were geniuses. They saw the arc of history. They knew where it was going. They see where it's going. And if you read their works, you'll see just how prescient they really are. Our collective numbers and our collective power are greater than those of the oligarchs or the kakistocrats or the plutocrats. Understanding that we can be a class for ourselves without them is to realize our pathway to emancipation and to a real democracy. All right, the last thing on the agenda has to do with a billboard that I occasionally see while I'm out driving around making money. And I want to share that sign with you right now. And maybe you've seen this sign before. But I want you to read, not notice just the beautiful woman dancing, but I also want you to read the text. Now, what does this text imply? From our perspective, or the perspective that somebody wants us to have, it implies that the culture of pre-communist China was somehow more free or more colorful or more vibrant than what presently exists in the People's Republic of China. Yet an honest look at the present Chinese culture tells us that since the Communist Revolution, illiteracy has nearly been wiped out, Industrial and technological advances in the People's Republic of China have outpaced every economy in the world since 2000, and that a China under the management of the Communist Party of China, more than 8 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty since the late 70s and has experienced the largest global reduction in inequality in modern history. What was China like before communism? Well, before communism, the Chinese people lived very different lives than they do now. China was an underdeveloped country which was divided not only by colonial powers, but it was divided between numerous warlords and tribes and hereditary landlord dynasties that fought within and among each other for power and wealth. And the people that were caught up in this struggle were ground up. The average lifespan for a Chinese person was the mid-40s. And hospitals were almost unheard of, except, of course, for those living in riches and luxury. Illiteracy was common, and remote tribes practiced slavery, and even the ruling classes practiced slavery. Women were treated as property and were kept out of education. Many were bought and sold as slaves under the guise of domestic servants. China's population, its resources, its society was exploited by colonial powers until the communists came to power. China before communism, you say? The literacy rate, as it stands right now, among China's 1.42 billion people, is 96.36%. The poverty rate is under 5%. That's not my figures. Those come from the World Bank. It is an industrialized, a global leader in technological development. Women are equal in every area of Chinese society. The superstition, the slavery is wiped out. Society is planned and managed through the principles of scientific socialism, as first codified by Marx and Engels, and later on Lenin. And so we're supposed to be sold on the implication that life was somehow better, more free, more prosperous, more colorful in China before the Communist Revolution? Who is it that's telling you this? Xin Yun, the theatrical troupe, the dance troupe on these billboards, is nothing more than a promotional program for the religious cult of Falun Gong. It consists of performing troops who are being exploited by their cult leader, Li Hongzhi. And forgive my Chinese mispronunciation. The finances of Xin Yun and Falun Gong are linked. Now, they are technically separate corporations, but they do share funds, they share executives, and they have the very same mission. In fact, Li Hongzhi describes the Xin Yun performance as a means of, and I quote his words, saving audiences. Saving them from what? Xin Yun's performances promote a false romanticism of China. The group is promoted by a magazine called the Epoch Times, which is a right-wing media outlet affiliated with the Falun Gong. Thus, Xin Yun is a fundraising mechanism for a reactionary religious cult. Colorful? Yes. Artistic? No doubt about that. Historically accurate? No. It's propaganda for a religious cult based on an idealistic, romanticized, and an anachronistic view of Chinese culture. That was never really the experience of most Chinese before communism anyway. So what's my point? Always question what you read. Think about the opposite point of view that you have when you believe something, and then begin to work from that point out. Challenge your own prejudice and ideas. Consider what people are, when you read, how you feel about it. What are people trying to tell you? Do they want you to think the way that you're thinking? Or is it a challenge to what you think to be true? Don't believe everything you read to be true. Question, question, question. If you're planning to attend one of these Shenyun performances, I want you to bear in mind that you're buying a ticket to fund an extremist right-wing cult. Enjoy the show.